Hello, everyone, and welcome to Friendly Ties. We today are doing something that we have not quite done before, which is to go and do something that we have already done, which is to talk about Ark Nova. So a little bit of a trick here, because actually I want to start off by kicking it over to Anastasia to talk about Golden Geek.
Surprise! It's a trap.
Well, thank you, Nick. So I have a little bit of a favor to ask everyone that is listening to this right now. So when we started this podcast, almost 2 years ago, guys.
Yeah. 18
It's
months
been a
ago-ish, yeah.
At least Ark Nova was our third episode, and that was 18 months ago. So
Yeah.
it has been a little bit of time. I had an aspiration that I wanted to get Friendly Ties nominated for a Golden Geek Award. I do not have any illusions of grandeur here. I do not expect to win the Golden Geek Award. All right. I just want to get nominated. That's all I want. I don't want to win. I just want to get nominated. So, as it turns out, you can help us do that.
It's true. It's amazing.
It's amazing. So
For 4 low payments of $0.00, you can click a link.
you can click a link and you can do that. It is slightly easier if you're already a member of Board Game Geek, but if you're not, you can also do that. But there is a link in the description. If you click on that link, you can, it will take you right to the nomination page in which you can nominate as many podcasts as you want, all the podcasts you want. If I was one of them, it's not as many as you want, but several. If we were one of them, I wouldn't complain. You can also nominate a number of other games for Golden Geek Award. I believe there's a number of other Golden Geeks.
Yeah, there's a ton of different categories. It's a pretty neat thing. Just the community can weigh in some ways, and they have a podcast category. So yeah, it'd be neat if we showed up there, but I'm not going to be too upset
pressure.
if we don't. Yeah,
I'm going to be devastated, but it's going to be fine.
From purely a game theory perspective, shouldn't we tell folks to just vote for us and no other podcasts, because it will up our relative score?
That's true.
Right?
Leave it to
That
Nick
is absolutely true.
to come in with the dominant
true.
strategy of this.
I was trying to be nice, but yeah, okay, so let me take that back. Don't vote for anyone else. Just vote for us. All those
There we
other
go.
podcasts, I love you. And when you get nominated, I'll tell everyone to vote for you because I don't want to win. I just want to get nominated. So just nominate Friendly Ties for Golden Geek Award. All right, I think I've said enough on that. Shall we get back to the episode?
We do
Yeah.
want
We actually
to
are
talk
talking
about
Ark Nova today. Yeah.
So yeah, when we first started Friendly Ties, like Anastasia said, it was one of our first episodes. Ark Nova was just coming out. Like Essence Spiel had happened 2 weeks before we released our episode. So some people in Europe had copies. No one outside of Europe essentially did. And the game was just starting to get a little bit of hype. And we did this whole episode. In fact, it's interesting. We recorded an episode, then played it more, and then did an addendum to that episode. And here we are, the third time doing another
addendum. An addendum to the addendum.
But a lot has changed in that amount of time, and our opinions have maybe modified. Also, this game is number 4 on the all-time list on Board Game Geek right now.
Is it that high?
Yes, it's
oh my God.
skyrocketed. It's been incredibly popular, way more so than I think anyone of us could have imagined. And it recently went up on Board Game Arena in alpha, and the 3 of us have played it there. You two far more than me, and we're like, you know what? We just have so much more to say. So I have played it 18 times now. Just going to start with some numbers, some raw numbers. Last time we recorded this, I think I'd played it 3 times, and I ended that podcast saying, I hope to play this one more. I had no clue that I would play it 18 times. That is a lot for me. I just looked it up. This is the 20th most played board game I've ever done. In the 13 years I've been logging my board games. So that's really impressive, especially considering how long the game takes to play. We joke sometimes I play a game 3 times and then I don't come back to it. And I played this one 18 times, and it's a far different story for you two.
Wait, do you log board games and card games separately?
No.
Like the fact that you've played like Ticho 100 million times is like Tichu one of the top 20 on there?
Yeah, Tichu's number 1, Crokinol's number 2.
Okay. Yeah, so that's actually even more impressive that it's
Yeah,
number
Yeah,
one.
that is impressive. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Especially given the length. I mean, I remember finishing that podcast and being like, doing that thing that I do where I'm like, oh, this is like kind of addictive and I want to kind of like figure this game out and I'm going to keep playing it. But like, I don't know how much more I'm going to keep playing it. Like there'll probably be some sort of upper limit. And honestly, one of the biggest reasons that I have wanted to do this episode is because not just because of it coming into Alpha and BGA and how many times I played it in the last couple of weeks, but how many times I played it in the last 18 months.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think at this point, I don't log my plays, but I played it 15 times on BGA. But before that, I know I played it at least 24 times. So I'm somewhere around 40 plays probably of this game over the last 18 months, and for me, that is a lot of games. Like I play more games now than I ever did before, thanks to the internet. But still, that particularly for a fairly new release that like didn't really come out in the height of the pandemic. I mean, we can go back and say Hallertau and Anno 1800 and other games that we played a ton, during lockdown. But this game has gotten a lot of playtime for me.
Serious staying power.
And I've probably played, I don't know, 50 or 60 times maybe is like a decent guess.
Yeah, just an incredible amount, especially considering it. So all three of us listened to our podcast episode over the last few days to get ourselves psyched up and ready for this. And my feeling listening to us in that last episode was we had fun. We were looking forward to playing it more, but we were all tempered in our opinions of it to various degrees, which is again why I think I'd be surprised if I could go back in time and tap all the three of us on the shoulder and tell us how much we'd actually play in the next year and a half. It's just crazy because it's not a short game. I mean, it's shorter now than it used to be, but it's still not a short game. We actually just played a game, the three of us. We stopped like 20 minutes ago, 3-player game on Board Game Arena, and it took about 2 hours and 20 minutes. That's I think partly because I am a slow player. Nick is twice as fast as I am, according to the statistics on BGA. But, we talked about the game potentially being shorter, and it definitely has gotten shorter. But also, I've played a lot of 2-player games where we're just kind of like leaning into it, letting the crunch happen. That's part of the fun.
Well, twice as fast as twice as many games, so.
That's true.
Nick with the numbers.
Yeah.
No, but I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact that I can play this game now 2-player in 90 minutes, 90 minutes, 100 minutes easily. And I remember, it is actually funny listening to the podcast because, John, I think you even referenced the designer saying, well, once you know the game, people can play it at 90 minutes. And I remember thinking in my head, like, bull. You're gonna have to bleep that out. But that's because, I mean, anyone who's heard that podcast, you go back and listen to it. Our first play of this game we were filming it, but it took like 5 hours. It was so long.
It was
and
excruciating.
so arduous.
Yeah.
We wouldn't even post it. That was back when we were posting playthroughs. We didn't post it. We were miserable. Like, it was one of our worst gaming experiences as a trio.
It's true.
Ever. Like, we didn't even say that in the day, but it really was.
Yeah.
It was not a great play. And yet we all were so intrigued by it that we did then play it again. And I think it took us 4 hours. I mean, again, filming, but it still felt like, man, this is going to be a long game. I said things like, this is just AP inducing, but once you know the game, it gets faster, it gets easier, it sinks in, it flows. And I that is a big factor of this game. It just took a little time, but it's one of the few games that has actually, for me, it's the easiest game that I played in a long time to reload. I am surprised at how quickly I remember so much of the game, given how many little intricacies there are and how many things there are to remember.
I think that's a really good point. So I've got a different thing that I'll get into in a minute that ties in really heavily with that. I think that there's a lot of the systems in Ark Nova, as we said in our original episode, they pull from a lot of different things. So if you're a gamer, it's a really good chance that it's pretty easy to kind of like pluck this from there, that from there, and you're like, oh, it all puts together. But the other thing is that it's actually pretty intuitive what you're going to do,
Yeah.
right? Like it's the pieces that you do, every kind of card that you have or put into play. Like, yeah, there's a lot of like special cards or special rules, but for the most part, it's like place down a thing where an animal can live and then pay some money. And now the animal is there and lives there. And you're like, great, awesome. That's really cool. And then, oh, this special card is a geologist and he likes rocks, so I go to the rock places.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of stuff that I think is intuitive that makes it easy for people to, like you said, reload, but also to pick up. I taught this game to my dad, who's a heavy gamer, and my stepmom was not a heavy gamer. She'll play games with us, but I thought it was going to be a really big struggle, and she like glommed onto it. I mean, I was really, really impressed at how quickly she picked it up. And then we played this game that I had a lot of experience with. My dad ended up winning the game. And then the two of them played by themselves separately from me. And then she ends up beating him. So there's something that's like very accessible about this game that is, I like, to me on the surface, just dense. And I was wrong.
I mean, I think if there was one thing we were all totally wrong about, it is that it is how accessible I think this game is, how easy. It's much easier than I thought to teach. It's much easier than I thought to grasp. I honestly don't know what was wrong with us. I don't know if it like hadn't come out long enough. I mean, we literally have a board game rules expert teaching it to us, and yet I don't know. I don't know if it was the TTS. There was something about the game that just at the beginning, I think probably from a lack of overall familiarity with the shape of the game. I think in every game I've played since, and even games I've taught, I think if people have either come into the game with a general understanding of kind of what it's going to be, and then with a few pointers from myself or others, it's been so easy for them to pick it up. It's just, I was honestly so surprised that I had made such a big deal about this concept of how hard it would be for new players. And yeah, I don't think it is.
Well,
I think I was wrong.
I think it really, there's a wide variety of people out there who are going to intersect with this game. And over the last year and a half, I have heard a refrain over and over again from a good number of people when I bring up Ark Nova. I'm like, oh yeah, I love Ark Nova. I played it so many times. I keep hearing, oh, I played it once. It took 4 or 5 hours. I don't think I'm ever going to play that game again. I have heard that over and over again from people who are highly experienced board gamers. And I usually say, well, was it a 4-player game? Yes, it was a 4-player game. And I think that's because it's a Euro game. People are used to Euros. And I think it's just very easy to be like, yeah, most Euros are best with 4 players. Let's get 4 people around the table. And I think you absolutely do not want to learn this game at 4 for just about everyone because of the time needed, especially if all 4 people are new. Even 3 people new is slightly better. But we're not alone in having that really rough first play. And it breaks my heart a little bit because I do love this game. I gave it the number 2 slot when I did a top 10 list for this year. I put Scout in the top spot, and I was wrong. This game,
I was like, do you have regrets?
Yes, I super do. I'd played the game like 7 times at that point. Now I've played it 18 times. I've played Scout like twice since then, and I've played it like 10 times more. And Scout's this tiny little card game. But what I'm trying to say is, this game is so lovely, and I enjoy playing it with the people I play with so much. It's my wife's one of her favorite games ever. She was in love with it the first time I taught it to her, so she was a little bit not one of those people who bounced off. But again, I was already experienced with the game, so when I taught it, I could do better at it. But if 4 people, nobody knows it, just plunged into that really long thing, excruciating game, and again, you are in charge of when the game ends. We talked about that quite a bit in the first episode.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what you're doing, then the game could feel like it could last forever. And man, I really wish there was a really short beginner mode that came with the game. I really do. Play this way first. But we already talked about it the last time. I just want to say you're not crazy. And we're not crazy.
Yeah, the thing that I wanted to say earlier is kind of like I feel like in a lot of ways my biggest kind of takeaway from this experience is that Ark Nova has blown my expectations of what folks are willing to tolerate in a board game. And the time thing is very real. I still think this game is too damn long. And I play a lot of it. Like, and I feel a little psychotic at some points where I'm like, this game's so long. It has like these problems on the strategy side. You can have really frustrating experiences, and it is bad to me. It is bad design to have a game that you can have a miserable, frustrating experience in your first few rounds, and then you're going to lose the game, and it's going to take 3 or 4 hours to do that. And I keep coming back to it. Other people keep coming back to it. Like,
you can't stop. You just can't stop.
It like ends up being strangely addictive, even though it has these things that I think are like these like huge flaws. So there's something there that is just like, is hitting my brain, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like people are willing to kind of look past some of these uglier parts because of the things that they really like about this game. And I kind of want to explore what that is.
Yeah. There's one of my best friends from college. Her and her boyfriend are very big gamers, but her boyfriend even more so than her, right? And particularly in Euro games. And she tolerates them. I think is it like shit called all the games I played once, like all the dusty brown boxes, that's how she views my taste. And yet, when she was like Ark Nova, she was like, I got to build a zoo full of monkeys. And like, she's not like, she's a great gamer, but like, and it's funny because people keep comparing this game to Earth, and Earth is the lighter, faster version. And her boyfriend was pitching Earth to her, and she was like, do I get to build a zoo of monkeys? And then I played Earth the other night, and I immediately texted her, and I was like, Earth is not Ark. Like, no, you're going to hate Earth. Like, Earth is everything that you hate about Euro games. And Ark Nova it has that, right? Like, there's something, I don't want to get away from your point, Nick, about the addictive quality, because that was one of the things I was going to say. But there's also there's something really engaging about the thing that you are building, right? Like whether it is your zoo of monkeys or that game of birds that I had and that game that we recorded the playthrough of, or whatever, I should say lack of birds. But whatever it is about your zoo, whether it's the map you're playing. I mean, one of the things we touched on at the end of that episode was this concept of like all these different asymmetric maps. Well, as it turns out, the asymmetric maps are awesome. They're amazing. They make for completely different experiences every time. You can't get enough of them. That alone is super interesting. The zoo that I'm playing, the animals that I'm playing, the way my action cards played out, the hand that I drew later in the game. Like there's something so satisfying about what you're building. Like it almost reminds me of like a 4X game or something, but like in a much more compact, much more Euro-y package. Like, and it just, to your point, Nick, like even when I have bad games, I mean, I literally am coming off a 10-game losing streak tonight. Like I might be exaggerating slightly, but and then I crushed you. And I was like, but not once did I say like, oh no, like our friend Hung has just beat me so many times in a row. And then every night I'm like, hey,
let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Like, you free? It's 11 o'clock at night. And I'm like, you free for a quickie? Ark Nova? Like, I mean, it's just, I find this game to be very addictive and highly satisfying and in a way that just scratches so much of what I enjoy about board gaming. In part because of that feeling, Nick, that it just, no matter what happens to me in the game, I have a good time. And that is something I know I said in that episode. And that's something that remains true.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is that you have built something. Yes, and
100%.
That's, I think, a really sexy gameplay loop. And I don't mean, a lot of games have you building something at the table, right? Some big center map, but it's like you are building something. I have my board. I have my zoo and my cards. There's, I think, a lot of ownership over your experience in this game.
Yeah, and you have a lot of ownership about going through the pieces of running the zoo. You know, those action cards that you have in front of you, they're just everything that you need to do. You know, you need to have cards. Cool. There's a cards button to draw cards. Okay, well, you need to put these in enclosures. You build them. You got to put them in there. Okay, well, you do the animals card. Like each one of these things really seems just in line with the plan that you're putting together. And I think that the way, like, you don't have to do them all in a row. Like, it feels like this game could have totally existed in a different structure where we all had the cards phase, and then we all had a building phase, and then we all had a putting the animals down phase, because you're going to do all these things. But the way it gets decoupled from one player to the next, and the way you have ownership over how quickly you run these things. I've talked to people who've played this a few times. One of my friends, after playing it once, a very competent Eurogamer, asked me, what percentage of the time do you activate things in the 5 slot versus other slots? And I thought about it, and I said, I think maybe like 20 to 30% of the time. Usually I'm hitting the other spots. And he was really surprised by that. He thought it would be a lot more than that. And talking to other people, and I've asked this question to other people, and I've heard people say, oh, like 80 or 90%. Like, oh yeah, I pretty much always just running the thing that's in the 5 slot. And I think that just shows that people can approach this game from different perspectives. But from my personal perspective, I love that a lot of these actions are only conditionally better with higher numbers. So it really does make sense to just keep, popping things when they're at the right number, not necessarily the biggest number, so you could get them back up again quickly. And that's a little bit of a loop that I find really great to think about. Should I build right now to build that size 3 so the build goes back down again, so that in 2 more turns it's back to the size 3 spot so I can build another size 3? I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense, especially early on in the game. And I think this is just one of the many little puzzly things that becomes satisfying to me. I think it's kind of an understated brain path for me to go through.
Yeah. I think it's almost like you're not building an engine, but you
super are
running one. You're just running an engine that was already created for you that you get to, basically push all the different pedals on. Does that make sense? Like, I think it's interesting that it's action selection of your own actions. I mean, it's what I love about Concordia too. It's like this concept of like you get to pick what you do,
sure, yeah,
and how you do it. But you're not. You could say, oh, that's like worker placement. You have those spots on the board, but it's not, because there's no competition with people over it, and the order of them, and the way you choose them, and your ability to use them, and the value of using them. That part alone is so engaging. Let alone what you then do with it, to your point, John.
Yeah.
The freedom is nice. And the games that are truly miserable are the ones essentially where you've accidentally backed yourself into a corner, and there's nothing. Like, this is a game where you can actually just basically do nothing, and you could have put yourself in a position or gotten really unlucky, but more likely you just didn't have the like crazy foresight you needed to not take any actions. And then those are the game experiences that I think can lean on the like very miserable side.
Yeah.
And yet like I want to say something to that, Nick, because like I do agree with you, right? Like you can put yourself in that position, and it can it can not only be difficult to get out of, but it also can just be frustrating, particularly as other people are doing things, and then seeing yourself losing tempo. And like this game, because of the way the game is, like, it's a player driven end game, and these 2 tracks have to cross, and it's uncertain. There's a tempo to it, and it's a much more tactical game than it is strategic. Like for me, actually, I think it's the perfect balance, because there is a ton of strategy, and there's a ton of tactics, and they're actually maybe more evenly weighted, but it is those tactics, come out quite a bit, especially in kind of that race to the finish. But what I want to say, kind of to your point about that misery, is that for me, compared to other games, and I'm particularly thinking of the Italian designers, the Grand Austria Hotel, the
Gollum.
Gollum. Speaking of another game we played around the same time, which I don't think any of us have played again since then. No. Even I love Messina 1347. I love Grand Austria, but those games, when you fall apart, like I feel like you completely and utterly fall apart. There's like nothing to do. There's no hope of getting back into the game. It's over. You had your 12 turns or whatever, and you're done. And the people around you are taking these extraordinary long pop-off turns. And I know that there's a quality of that here. But for me, I actually think one of the advantages to the length of the game, and this is probably the thing that I like most about it, is that I have never played a game of Ark Nova where I truly felt like I was out of it. And if anything, I felt like this is one of the rare games that I think you have time to, scramble, fall apart, foible around, whatever. Like, I don't not know what you're doing or have a long con game and like still get it together by the mid game and have a shot. Like, it's just, for me, one of the rare gaming experiences where I feel like I can either have a great plan and kind of consistently execute it, or there's gonna be enough time that if my starting hand sucks, or if something else goes wrong, or I make a mistake, I will have time to make up for it. I will have time to adjust. It's not over because I played one bad action.
Yeah.
And that's something I really like about this game.
I think that's because it's not an engine building game. Like, it really isn't. And I think some people expect it to be. It's often compared to Terraforming Mars, and depending on your definition, I think Terraforming Mars is much more of an engine building style game. But in Ark Nova, most of what you do is done once you do it. You build that building, and then you put an animal into it, and that's it. Like, that animal gets you a certain number of points. Maybe it gives you an effect. You can, move this around or draw a couple extra cards, but that's it. You don't have like a monkey engine. You don't have a predator engine. You can have a combo you could put together if you have a bunch of predators and you play another one to like continue getting the benefit from drawing, if you draw into the cards that does that. But it's not like something that just keeps happening over and over again. Sure, the more points you have, the more money you get. So you can talk about that a little bit. But, you talking about being able to get back in the game, I think it's because this game is all about popping off at the right time. Like, you can put together explosive, humongous turns and then peter out and do nothing for like 5 turns after that, as you're like, okay, well, now I'm just like doing this and I'm putting a tiny little animal in there. Like, you don't want to have your grand finale and then not get to the finish line. Like, it's all about hitting that at the right time. And so I think you've probably seen that happen before as well, Anastasia, where like somebody explodes ahead of you and you're like, well, how am I going to catch up? And then you have your stuff all come together and then you explode as well. And now they're kind of gassed out to a certain extent. And it kind of depends on who gets across the threshold at the end first. So I just think it's interesting. I think a lot of people have the wrong conception of what this game really is because of how it can be compared to so many other Euro games that have a lot more engine building mechanics in them.
Yeah. So first of all, I definitely agree that it is more tactical than it is strategic, and I think that is a boon. And I also will agree that if the wheels come off, you still get to play the game. Like, you might have a sort of 3-4 rounds that are really bad, but then you get to, then break comes and you get some more money and you get to start like taking your actions again. I think I don't have the same sort of positivity that like I'll be able to come back. I'm of the opinion that the rubber banding in this game is quite weak. There are some strategies that have unrealized gains, and they might come into play later, but I don't think there's really any rubber banding or very little rubber banding. And for those of you who are listening, I do this dumb thing where I play games by myself and I play multiple seats in the game. And so
this dumb thing. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. I just want to clarify what this is. If you've ever doubted the pure brilliance of Nick, he plays 4-player Ark Nova in hot seat against himself, 4 versions of himself, and then at the same time plays an async game with me. I just want to point out that he can do that all at once, and we all wonder why Nick always wins.
Well, so
that's your point.
the point here
back
is
to
that,
the episode.
A handful of those games that I play with myself, right? The top to bottom score, is 15 or 20 points for all the way from first to fourth place. But then I also played a game where I blew myself out by like 45 points in a game where like the score starts at like 100-ish, right? Like your scale score is like somewhere from like 100 to 150, or ignore the negatives and all that confusing stuff. But like 100 to 150 is like the score that you're looking at over the course of the game. And I regularly see people lose this game by 50, 40 points, like a third of the score scale.
Yeah.
And that is myself to myself included, right? Like there's something oddly snowbally in a game that like doesn't have, like you said, it's not an engine. There's no like there is an income system, but the income is very muted. Once you get, that is the rubber banding, right? Is that the income, once you get past a certain point, it doesn't get like crazy, larger, but you might have a couple certain cards in play that just make such a big difference, or you might just have cards that have absolutely no synergy whatsoever. And then you're just kind of like, it feels more like you are treading water. And I find myself with that feeling every once in a while, where it's just like, yeah, I'm just trying to get through, more than like everything is popping off. And, to your point, Anastasia, like that can be okay, because as you were saying, John, right? Like each of the pieces are discrete, and actually sometimes you can feel like, oh, I'm in trouble, and it ends up working out okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the elephant in the room for this game is the deck of cards. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you're talking about, you're playing against yourself and you have these potential massive swings, and well, maybe the person who won by a lot, they drew into their combo better. And I think, the number one complaint I hear about this game, and I really do think we should talk about it, is card draw luck. And is that a bad thing? Because I've heard the whole range of opinions from other people, and it is true. Like, it's an enormous deck of cards, and you absolutely should not try to draw something that's going to be good for you. You should just deal with what you have. But I mean, the last time you and I played, Anastasia, before this, a 2-player game, I just drew so many of these predators, and then I drew the predator conservation card, and then I drew the lion that scored for all the predators I had already, and I won by 1 point. And
1 point,
like literally 1 point. Did I beat you, or did the deck beat you? I don't know.
It's so funny because when you think about this, and I do want to add this caveat to what I said, because to go to what you said, Nick, about there's not a lot of rubber banding, and it is true. We should all remember that the girl who said she just lost 10 games in a row is the one who was like, I never felt like I was out of it. Like, I don't actually know to what extent winning is like possible, because for me, the experience is not always about, winning. I'm always attempting to win, but, in terms of the actual success of that, I'm not sure if my math would add up based on, these horrible draws. And I want to acknowledge that because of the game we just played. It was a 3-player game, and Nick had a terrible hand draw at the beginning. He told us that. He continued to tell us that. He drew dozens of times. I feel like dozens of times he continued to try and draw cards, and it never really came together. I mean, Nick, you still ended up in third by 1 point, right, to John. So you kind of brought it back, but
I caught up, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it was a nice experience to catch up, but like I just felt like I was losing all game long.
but
I was right.
He did. He felt like he was losing a game. I felt like I was kind of consistently ahead for most of the game, and then frankly, I didn't tank my lead. And let's be clear, I have done plenty of games where I've done exactly what John said, and I have like had this great turn or great several turns, and then tanked my lead. And I think that I'm going to go back to what John was trying to bring up, which is the cards, and that is to say that the deck and the randomness are what make this game possible for every single thing that we are saying. And I mean that in the best and the and like the worst of ways. And in the episode that we did about Ark Nova initially, like, that was my biggest complaint. I said, there's a ton of randomness. If you don't like that, like, it was my biggest concern. And yet I think that actually for me, where the deck falls into that is that this game just wouldn't be what it is without the possibility, the magic, the uncertainty, the unknown, just the literal fabric of the game that are the cards that you draw. You can draw into something amazing. You can dig for something amazing. You mean to let go of a strategy because you can't get what you want. I mean, adapting to that, adapting to what's in your hand, adapting to what comes out in the card river. It's just part of the game, and I wouldn't change that. If anything, at this point, I just want more. I just want more cards.
Yeah, preach. Honestly, so well said.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost like a gambling slot machine result from that deck. I mean, in that game, when I drew that lion, I yelped, like so happy. Like you draw a card and just this extreme elation. And there's the 30 other times I drew a card and I was like, this isn't work. This isn't good. But then every now and then, you hit the jackpot and you're like, oh my gosh, I got so lucky. And then you're like, did you actually get so lucky? How many cards did you draw until that actually happened? It's just an interesting endorphin thing that does really work.
I love the point. I think that the card deck is the lifeblood of the game. And like I said earlier, this game has thrown out the window my expectations for what people are willing to tolerate.
Yeah.
It seems like too much randomness for me for a long game. I guess it's a heavy game, right? Like I think it is a heavy game. There's a lot of rules.
Is it like I compared it to Gaia Project last time, and like I don't know what I think I was wrong.
Well, it's a lot more tactical than Gaia Project. Like Gaia Project has tons of long-term strategy. This game,
it doesn't break my brain
much.
In the same way.
Right.
Yeah,
well, I think because you can't think as long-term, and
you're
you
looking at what's in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And sure, you could trip and fall in Ark Nova, but generally, something you did an hour ago does not trip you up now. It's something you did 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Talk about a game where you can ruin yourself, utterly.
Yeah.
Like in this game where I didn't know what to do. I was building these like 5 enclosures, and the two of you were like, oh my God, what do you have planned? I was like, I have nothing planned, but maybe I'll draw into 5s. And if not, I can play 4 guys there. Like there are ways to sort of like hedge, and that's nice, right? That you can kind of like start setting up and moving in a direction, even if you don't have a perfect game plan on the spot, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is just, this game is very much about the journey. I mean, the destination is fun. Like winning is fun. You want to be competitive, but it's so much about the journey. Do you get there? Like sometimes I just kind of feel like not necessarily sad, but like when the game is over, you're like, oh, okay. Well, I guess the game is over now. Like I was enjoying doing that, and I think that's where the addictive part comes in, because I'm not thinking, oh, I want to play this again so I win next time. Like, oh, I want to play this again so I can be playing it again.
Yeah. So speaking of the deck, I actually am curious on another thing that we talked a lot about in that our first episode about Ark Nova, which is the meme cards, essentially. Mm-hmm. And how much have we played with or without them since? Or do we still feel the same way?
And if our opinions have changed?
Yeah.
Well, I've not used them since. I've literally played one game with the meme cards out of those 18.
Is that the first one? Just that first game?
That was the very first game. That's literally the only time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the same way. I played that first game, and I played one other on BGA, and it's because I forgot to click peaceful, and and then I used the card and like demolished like the other play. I felt so bad. Like I was like, it didn't feel good. It didn't feel good. I didn't like it, but I am glad to have played it again to kind of be reminded of that, because it's part of the game. But I think, Nick, you have played more than I think I have.
I've started playing with them again, not because I like them, but because I'm preparing for a tournament, and I thought that I don't know if the tournament's going to use them as rules, so I just didn't want to be blindsided by their effects.
Yeah.
I still kind of hate them. I think very much our first gameplay was one of those game experiences. Okay, let me take a step back. I think most of the time the meme cards don't have a very terrible effect on the game. I think in a lot of games that you play them, maybe 1 in 10 games you play them, they're like maybe someone gets hit, it's not that big a deal. But every once in a while, like you play it and it's like it's done at a point where it's early in the game and it just completely hamstrings a player, or maybe multiple players, but it's usually like one player who gets like hamstrung. And it's not even necessarily the player who's winning. Like you might look and be like, well, it can only attack the person with the most appeal. But as we know, having the most points in a game does not necessarily mean that you're winning. And especially in a game that has 2 kinds of victory points, it definitively doesn't mean that you're winning sometimes. And so it just has these like kind of really frustrating moments that I don't think are worth the moments where they actually are kind of fun.
I feel like in the early game, I'm spending enough time trying to focus on like how soon is someone going to activate the break? Like, am I going to have enough time to get what I want to do done? Will I have enough money? And let alone focusing on those elements of it, but also just the nature of a game that we've talked about is so satisfying for what you are building, for what you're creating, and your hope is what you're creating is, well, frankly, better than everyone else's. But then to so directly attack someone for it. Now, having said that, I do recognize a lot of people play this game with the attack cards. I'm actually honestly shocked at how many games I see on BGA of people. Like, so rarely actually do I feel like I see people, posting games with, peaceful mode on it. So I imagine, and I'd be actually curious, for people listening to this, if you have played Ark Nova and you want to comment in the comments, like, I'd be curious, how do you play it? Because I am genuinely curious, like, how many people play the game with these negative cards. I mean, for me, I feel exactly the same way I felt 18 months ago. I don't lose anything from it, and it definitely, it doesn't add anything, and if anything, it takes away. But I also like playing games. I don't feel like Ark Nova is multiplayer solitaire, but I guess, from a strict definition, it could be, and that doesn't bother me at all. So I've been pretty clear that I don't like to be a mean player, except I guess if you're Nick and you're winning, and I feel
and then you're positively gleeful. There's two kind of primary forms of interaction in the game that to me say, yeah, this is not as multiplayer solitaire as some other games that I've played. And it's the tempo of the break stuff and paying attention to that. And then the racing for the conservation points. Like, I will say one thing that I actually really like about playing this on BGA compared to playing on Tabletop Simulator or in real life, which, by the way, in real life, does anybody else feel like the pieces are very small? It always throws me off.
I'm actually genuinely trying to think if I've ever played it in real life. Like, I'm sitting here.
I
own it. I do. Sure. Okay. Please, guys, if there's anything to know about me, that is not a marker of whether or not I've played the game for real.
Yes.
But I don't think I have.
Yeah, the vast majority of my plays have been actually physical. Probably, maybe not vast majority, but 10 out of those 18.
Yeah, I think in my mind I played it with you, John, but I honestly don't know if I have. Anyways, that's not important, but clearly
the enclosures in particular just feel so teensy to me. I don't know why.
Are they really? They're so tiny.
But on BGA, it immediately just tells you how many tags a person has. You don't need to scope out their whole board or anything like that. So it's nice to be like, oh, you've got 3 predators, I've got 4, so I got a little bit of wiggle room before I need to go for my conservation, or I don't want to risk it. I'm gonna go. I like that it's very easy to see the tags in that format.
Yeah, for sure. So I have just there's a couple of other things we said in that podcast. So I'm just curious where we land on. So I can't remember if this was the game where Nick, you coined that phrase, game of restrictions, or if it was something else that I just started using it around the time.
Stand by
it. It was this game. Was 100%. So
stand by it.
I'd almost forgotten that we'd said that about this game, because I now use that term all the time. Do you still feel like this is a game of restrictions?
Yeah, I feel like I'm playing. And this is not a criticism, it's just a comment. I feel like I'm playing to make sure that I don't put myself into a bad corner more often than playing to do something explosive or amazing. I'm careful about when I'm going to run out of money, what's going to happen with my cards, and if I'm going to have to discard them, or how can I use them beforehand. I was very bad at that in the game that we just played. So, but that's the kind of stuff that it keeps me up at night, so I do think it's a game of restrictions. I do stand by that. And I don't think that makes it bad. I just, to me, that is what it is, and to me that lends itself towards the, tactical nature that we've been talking about.
Yeah. I think if anything, for me, Ark Nova has forced me to become a better tactical player. This game, I think in a really good way, really exercises that muscle of you can't do everything. You have to let things go. I can only focus on one plan in my hand, or maybe the cards in my hand, they don't work with the goals, or they don't work with the way my action cards are laid out. There's a lot of times where you have to make a choice, and you have to kind of go with that. BGA also, I think, for all of its pluses and minuses, it also forces me. There's no takebacks. I mean, we talked a lot about how nice it is amongst us that we often kind of let ourselves kind of fix things and adjust things, and we ran into that several times tonight. Yep. You can't take it back. That is that downside of playing on that particular medium. And I think this is a game that does benefit from that when you have the opportunity to do that. I think that helps a little bit with letting it be a little bit more forgiving. But I also think, to kind of circle back on kind of where we started and where we are now, one big thing that has kind of come up is knowing the arc of this game, the timing of this game helps, I think, with understanding those restrictions. And like, I know something we didn't do in our first game, which I've reflected on a lot, is like, we didn't understand that you like needed to break. We didn't understand that you like needed to play the sponsors card for money, that the sponsors card is like your way of controlling the tempo, your way of giving yourself money.
We thought it was like, in the last worst case scenario, use it for money and move the break. And now it's like, oh no, like 80% of the time I smash that thing to move the coffee break token. Yeah.
Exactly, to make that happen. And that's so essential because that first break is kind of everything. And I remember that actually being another thing, Nick, that you kind of wanted to lop off like the first round of the game. And I'm curious if either of you still kind of feel that way, that the beginning of the game is too slow, or it feels like,
I think Ark Nova Preludes would be an improvement. Yeah.
Do you feel the same way, John?
Yeah, I do. I mean,
really?
I do. Well, I guess it depends on the context. Like, I don't mind playing it the way it is forever. I don't necessarily need it to be shorter because I know what I'm getting into and I sit down to play the game. But going back to first impressions, I just can't help but focus on the people who would potentially love this game that are never going to play it a second time because they had such a miserably long first play. And I think for that, the Ark Nova Prelude type thing would be amazing. Like so many people like this game already. Imagine if it didn't have this frequent awful first impression. Would it be number 1 at Board Game
No,
Geek
you're
now,
right. And
not
you're
just
not
number 4?
Yeah, no, 100%. All right, so final question, guys. This is the one thing that I remember from this podcast. Before I went and re-listened to it, this was the only thing that I really remembered all through these 18 months, was Nick saying it wasn't worth the work. So I want to know now, Nick, was it worth the work?
Yeah, I was wrong. You don't play something 50 or 60 times and you're like, no, it wasn't worth it. I'll eat those words.
I think it's certainly worth the effort to get into it. It's
only
playing a lowly 18 games. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's worth it. I've definitely had an Ark. We're using it all. I've had an Ark.
It's a drinking game.
As well. I know,
every time
right?
we say Ark in this game in this podcast.
I remember when I played it 7 times. Which was relatively soon after we had recorded that episode. At that point, I had played, if I remember correctly, all of the asymmetric boards. Maybe I'd played it 8 times. But I played all the boards except map 0. I don't think I ever got around to playing that one, but that's a training wheels map. So, and I remember feeling like, okay, well, I think I'm kind of done with Ark Nova. Like, I tried all the maps. I played them all once. And my motivation kind of lulled a lot, and I didn't really touch it for a couple of months. And I think that's probably around when I made that top 10 list, and I put it in the number 2 slot. and then I think my wife Jessica was like, one day she's like, hey, we haven't played Ark Nova in a couple of months. Let's play it. So we played a game, and I was like, oh man, this is really fun. And suddenly I found myself wanting to play it again, and we played it like within the next week, and then again and again. And so I just wanted to articulate this interesting curve of excitement where, like, the first play was terrible, and then the second and third play I was like starting to get really high on it all the way up, and then I lulled again around the 7 or 8, and now I feel like I'm just going up and up and up. Like, I feel like every single time I play it now, and I'm up to play 18, I'm even more enthusiastic about it, and I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's just because I finally fully come to accept what kind of game it is and the kind of experience I'm going to be getting from it. And maybe I'm just so used to not playing games all that often that I kind of figured I was done with it when I'm actually not. And so to come full circle back to your question that I already answered, yeah, it was totally worth it. I think even just for those 7 games, even if I never actually went back to it and picked it up, I think that's a lot of fun that I had in those experiences, and especially so now that it's just continuing on into the sunset for me and apparently all of us.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thanks for listening to us talk about this game for a second time. Yes. Clearly, it just sits
for another
there,
hour.
Persistent, consistent. Well, as we mentioned earlier, we're trying to get nominated for the Golden Geeks. Don't forget to check in the comments so you can see the link that you need to click on so that you can get us up there and get us nominated. We'd really appreciate it. And other than that, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you have a wonderful week. And if you want to comment on this, make sure you head over to YouTube. You can put comments in the YouTube version of this podcast. Thanks, everyone.